What is going on, YouTube? Got another little accessory in the mail for the Gen 7 today. As you can see, I've got a pretty small roof rack on the top of this that doesn't quite cover the whole roof, and so I ordered this big behemoth to replace what's on here. This setup that I bought actually has a 3-wire power supply to it. I'm not exactly sure if all 3 wires are connected, but it does have a power switch on the back to turn this on and off, which I do think is kind of a nice feature. But I'm going to plug this into the accessory port on the controller and find out if this is something that's going to power up whenever I turn power onto the truck, and whether or not I can control it with the switch on the back. Once I determine that, I'll go ahead and remove this rack and I will show you how I size up everything. Obviously I'm going to have a couple of holes left on the roof of this, which I will probably go through and repair. I guess there's no better place to start but to go ahead and pull the top of this off. And unplug that. Okay, so that's annoying. Wow, this has a bunch of different settings. That's okay, alright, so that's a good sign. But the button on the back will run this through all kinds of different flash sequences. So you first start it up and it has this type of disco setting here. It runs through like a little bit of a chase. It runs through a little bit more of a, flashes the outer 4 and then the inner 2. And it switches back and forth between 3 and 3. Changes speed, and then it goes solid, and then of course the next one is going to turn it off. One thing I want to see here is if this is in this setting here as I leave it, and what happens when I just would simply switch the power off. Does it stay in that mode when I turn this back on? The answer is no. That's something that can be fixed simply by just hitting that power switch on the back, this little guy right here, and that changes your setting on the lights themselves. We've got, I believe these are the light buckets themselves. So I'll open these up, see what those look like. Pretty much standard. And this appears to be all of the hardware. Those are your mounting screws, and these look like the tower mounting brackets. There are 4 of them, 1 for each corner, and those will bolt to the holes that are on here. And then of course this will sit down a little bit differently on the rack itself. This is, I believe these will bolt in more from the side on the roof than directly in from the top. So I still will have 4 holes that I made originally on the roof. And these also come with a branded light cover from Hella, so it looks like you can put those stickers on, and as well you've got lenses for each light bucket. There's 6 of those, 6 covers, and 3 sets of 2 stickers on each to go with everything. So that's all the parts and pieces. I'm going to take a minute to bolt all of this together, and I will get back to you and show you how that's done. Okay, so I have gotten this put together now. Turned out really well. This is a considerably different rack than the one that I'm replacing. For starters, it doesn't have bolts that mount directly down through the top of the roof. It actually has kind of a little bit more scale, true to how one of these racks would be, but it's got side towers that you end up bolting on here, and then of course the way the light bar is actually built, it consists of an LED light bar that spans across the whole back side of this thing. I gotta see if this will focus a little bit better. At any rate, putting this together was a bit of a trick because I only received 4 screws to hold the light bar onto the back. And so I couldn't put all of the lights on here and then assemble it to the rack. I actually had to put the lights on first, which are held on by screws down on the bottom. And then I took the light bar and bolted one screw on the outside, two on the two middle lights, and one more on the outside over here. So my two lights, one here and one here, do not have screws on them, but I think they'll be pretty much held in place fine by the other four. Probably just a little bit of a mistake, because I'm sure we're supposed to have 6 screws in them, especially since there's 6 holes back here and all the lights can't accept a screw of that size. So pretty sure that was just a little bit of a mistake from the factory itself. But I got the stickers put on there, got the covers put on the lights. I haven't seen how much it dims the lights once, you know, all of that stuff's in place. So I think my next step now is to go ahead and pull the old rack off of the Gen 8. So this goes together really well. It's a good looking rack. I think it's going to be a little bit more fitting for the truck. It's going to cover considerably more of the roof, and you know, it'll protect that back end like I mentioned earlier. I took a roll, and with only rack covering half of the roof, a big rock just managed to hit just in the right spot on the back of that thing. And seeing how my Gen 7 shell cracked with just the slightest touch on the Lexan, I really don't want to take the chance of having that Gen 8 just, you know, shatter into pieces with just the right roll in just the right spot. So I figure this thing is probably going to help keep that thing looking a little bit better, a little bit longer. So as you can see, I've got the old roof rack taken off, and here's the hole where previously I had put the connector and the connecting point where all 4 of the lights that were on the other rack, where that went through the roof. Eventually, once I'm ready to install that, this connector will go through here, and then I will as well take some zip ties and secure it to the rack so that stays in place. Now, as you can see, as I set this down, it doesn't exactly sit quite flush on the roof where it's supposed to. So what I'll need to do at this point is just take a pair of pliers and very gently kind of spread these towers out. So now that at that point it'll sit down on the roof rack a little bit more. This has a molded drip rail around the top, you know, similar to how the actual Scout would have. So what you want is the foot of this rack to pretty much sit right at that drip rail, right at the very top of it, and then the screws will bolt in pretty much kind of at the side of it and sort of be tucked in on the inside corner. So really at this point it's a matter of just kind of picking that spot where you want this to sit, front or back. I probably want maybe this front edge flush with, you know, the front edge of the windshield at the very top here. So I'll probably go with mounting it somewhere in this neighborhood right here. So what I can do is I'll show you what my plan is for hopefully very gently bending these legs outward so it will fit properly. So what I'm going to do here is just take my pliers very, very carefully and sort of tweak these a little bit to the outside here, just a tiny little bit, just to get a little bit more width out of the footprint. You don't want to do much because it doesn't take much to bend these to the point where you've done some damage to the metal itself. And I'm also grabbing very gently, and I'm trying not to move the plier so as not to scratch this brand new rack. I could obviously put something in between there, but I'm being gentle enough that I shouldn't cause any damage. So all I'm doing is just taking that and probably tweaking it no more than about 1/4 of an inch per tower. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to size it up. Still not quite wide enough. Almost there. Pretty close. Back felt a little bit. This is narrower in the backside than it is in the front, so that's something to keep in mind. On the Gen 8, not every vehicle is going to be set up that way. You're gonna find that your mileage may vary on that. But just pick whatever distance width your vehicle requires, and maybe try not to push it too much further past that so you have to bend it back or anything, because the more you bend this metal back and forth, that's when you really stand the chance of weakening the metal. So getting pretty close here. I really like the width on the back. I think I can actually make that work pretty well for me. Just a hair more on the front side, and then do a test fit again. I might even see if I can't just get that to sort of bend outward just a little bit more with my hands. Didn't take much to see what happens. Oh, there we go. That's sitting just about right. And I would say that's pretty much the width that I'm looking for. I've got good contact all the way around. I'm sitting on the rain gutter basically all the way around. Where I end up marking the holes is going to dictate where that sits down. But I think as far as the general width of everything and how it's supposed to be, I'm looking pretty good. One thing to keep in mind too is that there are little manufacturing anomalies. You can't really see it, I think, on this, but this tiny piece of metal kind of takes a little bit of a dive downward. So if you need to, before you land these, tweak maybe grab a larger pair of pliers. And you can also kind of bend these a little bit from side to side if you need that to sit a little bit more vertically instead of being kicked off one way or the other. But if they are built by machine, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the most consistent thing all the time. The parts probably come down an assembly line. There's probably a tack welder that welds it all together. You never know if each one of those is sitting in the exact spot that it needs to be sitting in before those are tack welded together. But I think as I see it right now, I'm looking pretty good. I might want to tweak this back leg just a bit more. Maybe this guy inward. Just because once it's sitting on the vehicle, once it's all bolted down, I want to be sure that those legs are sitting a little more straight. So looks like I need to bend this one out just a hair. Okay, now we're looking really good. This is great. Okay, I think once it sits down there, you know you've gotten it right. It lands right on there, and that is exactly what you're looking for. So now what I want to do, I just even need to mark it. So I can even take something like this. This is just I call this like an auger bit. It's got a sharp point on it. I can just take this right where this sits on the side, be sure that this rain gutter is sitting right where I want it to sit. Something to just scratch that surface so I have a reference there. I can assure you that drilling this hole on the edge like this is probably going to be a bit of a challenge. Holding it and getting it to go through in the exact spot without it walking around on you might be a little bit of a pain. If you have any kind of a drill punch at all, I do recommend maybe setting an initial drill punch spot, and then just double check and make sure that you can see where those are marked. And if you need to go back and make those more clear for you, like I do, I'll go back and I'll just put a spot right where those are going to go in. And that one's here. And this one is right here. So, as you can see, I've got little black dot, same thing on the other side. Also too, I'd like to show off my window clearing job that I did a couple weeks ago. It is not 100% perfect. You can see some of the plastic had sort of gotten kind of, I guess, melted, if you want to just lack of a better way to call it. But what I ended up using was 5F5 paint remover. I did it a little bit different than how everyone else had done it. It took me probably no more than about 45 minutes to get the windows clear on this thing, and I had it basically back together and sitting on top of the vehicle. At any rate, those are the holes. I'm going to take a pause for a second. I'm going to go get the drill set up. Okay, in case those of you out there in internet land are not familiar, this is what's called a center punch. And this is something that you can use to essentially set your initial indentation in the surface that you are about to drill into. What this has is a it's spring-loaded tip here. And as you press down on this, basically that spring loads up with pressure inside till it reaches a point, and then it pushes this pin back out with a little bit of force, and it creates a nice little indentation that the tip of the drill bit sits in whenever you start the drill. If anyone who's ever tried drilling anything without using one of these, you know the drill just walks right off the surface, and you struggle with trying to get it to stay in one particular spot. This is a cheap tool that, maybe $10 on Amazon, if that. Sometimes you can buy 2 or 3 of these in a package, and You know, it's a cheap investment, but I use this a lot in my electrical work, and it saves a ton of heartache when you measure something out and you need that hole to be exactly where you measured it to be. This is the answer right here. This is what's going to get you that result. So how this works is you just simply, once you have your holes marked, you take this and again you press it down. It's going to feel like it's a little hard. And then you press it down until it pops like that, and then what that does is creates a nice little indentation. Like I said, the drill tip, the drill bit is going to sit right there. It won't spin or walk out of this now, and that's really going to help this project go a little bit easier. And you guys can go ahead and make fun of my probably near 50-year-old drill. The thing might even be older than that. This is a Black & Decker old chrome housed steel drill. I picked this thing out for $5 at a thrift shop. Not a thrift shop, it was like a second-hand pawn shop. That's what they're called, because we don't have many around here. I almost forgot what they're called. But $5, and you know, this thing is probably going to outlast any battery-powered newfangled drill that you could ever buy. But needless to say, this thing still is alive and kicking, so if you want to make fun of it, you can, but it still does a great job. And like I say, all you need to do is just place that drill bit right at that point where you set that center punch, and there's no more guesswork. It just goes right through that hole. Okay, so those holes are drilled, and because I'm pretty sure I won't need to take this back off of here once I get this all set up, what I will do now is go ahead and place my rack. Looks like my holes are lining up just fine on this side. I'm sure they're a-okay on the other side. And what I need to do is just locate my hardware, which is of course buried under the body. I believe these are Allen screws. Yes, they are. So what helps sometimes with these is to go ahead and just take that screw and put it right on to the end of the screwdriver and find that point that it's going to pop through, and it just goes right in. And as long as I don't drop it. Okay, so we're looking good there. So now those two screws are in. What I'm going to do is just flip this up on its side, and those should stay in place just fine. There we go. I just want to make sure that those stay in place when I start doing the other side, so that way it's not just continuously walking around on me and I end up getting, you know, frustrated with them not staying in place. We all know how that stuff goes. This kind of acts like an extra helping hand. Sometimes if you want to take your driver, and once you know that that nut is at the end of the screw tip there, you can spin it backwards once or twice and make sure that you're not cross-threaded. The threads will actually seat pretty well, and then you can begin just threading it forward like I'm doing here now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down now that they're both made on this side. And it looks like perfect placement. I am right at the top of the rain gutter, which is exactly where I want it to be. Anyone that's ever had a roof rack mounted on a vehicle similar to this, any kind of SUV or anything like that, knows how this system works. And if you haven't ever done something like this, or you've never owned a vehicle like this, then you might not be exactly totally familiar with how these mount on a roof. But it is not brain surgery. It is not complicated in any way. It just takes doing the steps properly and in the right order, and it makes things go a lot easier. So we're just going to get that one screw in there. So all my 4 screws are in. I'm just holding it near the end of the screw right now. I'm not even trying to thread it on there. And what I'll do is I'll take that and spin it backwards once or twice until I feel like it's caught the thread just right and I'm not cross-threading in any way. And as you can see, I'm currently tightening this down. Same thing with the back. I can turn this way just so. So again, I'm holding this to the inside and dropping it. It's a small nut, it really is. It's a tough one to hold on to. I could probably use a pair of pliers or tweezers or something like that to hold it in place, but okay. I feel like I'm in a good spot there. And again, I mean, if you can see how clear you can see my hand inside of the windows here. That was again with just using 5F5 paint and varnish stripper. It's an incredibly toxic mix of chemicals. It's not just one chemical, it's a toxic mix of chemicals. But I'll tell you, the many times that I've stripped pieces of furniture, refinished them and stuff like that, taken any lacquer off of anything, that stuff is the stuff to do it with. And wow, does this add a ton of weight to the top of this thing. Oh boy. Might even need to readjust the rear shocks to kind of compensate for a little bit of the sag that that's going to introduce. But this is considerably larger. I mean, so it's at least like twice as big as what the other one is. Plus it's got more lights on it. This was a good amount of weight to have on here before, and you know, I thought the rack looked great, but getting that scratch on the back is really what kind of soured me on continuing to use it. Now, one of the things I want to do is I want to catch this wire at least on this particular spot right here, so it's not free floating on the roof. I want to ensure that there's no stress on this connection, and currently the way that it's set up, there is. So what I'll do here, you can take your zip ties and kind of bend a little hook on them. Like if you're going around an object, you can kind of bend a little curly Q on the end. Okay, you take that, and that will help you be able to get that tip pointed back up towards the top where it needs to be. Make sure not to include both bars like I almost just did. Make sure that it's in the center as well, or close to it. This one has two dividers here, so just, like I say, just be sure it's in between those. You don't want to lock the zip tie down and find out that you've got something else in the middle that you didn't want locked down with it. And what I'm doing is, the reason why I'm doing this obviously is to provide strain relief for the wiring. Loose wiring in this type of situation can really lead to bad things, and you don't want, I might even go as far as to take another zip tie and maybe put it like on this location towards the outside, so that way there's no chance of being able to pull that wire out. Not that I really think that it would ever run into a problem being in this location on the roof, but you never know. You know, where we take these things through sticks and stuff like that, you know, sometimes those tend to reach out and grab stuff at the most inopportune times. And so when I'm done with that, I'll just trim my zip tie. And now I would pretty much consider my wiring, you know, fairly well secured here. You can see I might add another zip tie on this. I'm not exactly sure where I want to put it. I still have access pretty good to this. There's a power switch on the back of this. Not a power switch, excuse me. This one is like a mode switch, and you've got, I think, about 5 or 6 different modes that this will operate in. My lead will unfortunately be a little bit short for where it needs to go inside of the chassis. So I have here a bag of 6-inch long extensions. So I will take and now add an extension to this. And if I make a recommendation, let's go dark color for dark color here on this. This is not tabbed on this particular connector like this has the space for tab here. And so what we'll do here is with the brown, orange, yellow, we'll go black, red, white, kind of a little bit closer color for color. The black for the brown, the red for the orange, and the white for the yellow. And we'll go ahead and make that connection up just like that. And that should be, I think, enough to be able to get me to where I need to go. You have the option either of taping this down, which I may do on this one, instead of gluing it, like I did the last time. Because I realized when I went to take the wire out, obviously the super glue ate away at the coating of the wire, which means I'll just have to do a little bit of a repair if I want to use that again, because now I have some exposed wire, because unfortunately I tore the coating on the wire. Yeah. Alright, so I've got a little bit of, it's actually green tinted alcohol. What I'm doing is just cleaning this surface away where there might be some excess silicone that has run off of the windows and gathered on the roof itself, on the inside of the ceiling of this, which would not allow tapes to stick to it. So I'm just wiping and cleaning that away. Okay, now that that's clean, I'll grab pretty much just about any kind of tape I think will work. I have had really good luck with using, believe it or not, postal packing tape when it comes to trying to land some of this stuff, and all you need to do is just grab a tiny piece of it right here. And you know where you want your wire to be, so you want to just lay that flat on the inside of the roof, kind of pointed in whatever direction. My goal is to follow the pillar all the way down and probably leave it loose from this point so I have enough room, because the point where it plugs in is about here inside, so I've got plenty of length, but then that'll also allow me to be able to leave this attached in here. I do want to point out, when I bought this, I got this all set up. It was working great. The night that I hooked it up, the next day I took, and I was going to do some filming. This was a couple of weeks ago. I just did a big seven video series with this thing, with this rack on it. And if you notice in that video, this rack is not on. And the reason being is that the second I pulled this thing out and kicked it on, I believe it was this LED on this side, far right, just burned out immediately. And I've used LEDs a lot in my lifetime, and I don't think I've ever seen an LED burn out. The only thing I could really think of is that when the connections were soldered onto the back of this, that someone spent a little extra time with that solder tip connected in contact with the LED, which ultimately caused internal heat damage, which after just a few minutes of electricity being put through it, it just caused that component to fail. An example of this like headlamp, this generic headlamp I bet I've had this thing for 5 or 6 years. This thing has been dropped, gotten soaking wet, it's had water inside of it, everything you could possibly imagine. And never once has it had a single LED burn out. In fact, I took one of the LEDs out of this, desoldered it from the board and everything to fix this LED, so I wouldn't have to send this silly thing all the way back and wait a couple weeks for that turnaround repair or replacement or what have you. So I ended up harvesting one of these LEDs out of this thing to fix this thing in here. So here we are. This is what this is going to look inside. As you can see, it's just taped on the roof, and it's also taped up here by the cowl right here. And that's probably going to be more than enough to hold it in place for what it's worth. Plugging the battery in or turning things off, because the location of the power switch on the inside of the Gen 8 is a little tricky. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and just absolutely double check and make sure that I'm completely tightened up all the way around. I like it when little projects like this go quickly. This is not the kind of thing that you want to take all afternoon to get done. If you're spending any more than 45 minutes or an hour on this kind of project, then kind of pushing on, taking a little bit too much time invested for what you're trying to do here. So if you just make these, have the proper tools and kind of have an idea of what it is that you're getting yourself into when you're getting yourself into it, then these tend to go a lot easier and a lot faster. Just a tiniest little bit of planning and forethought put into it, and then the results end up happening much faster and much easier with a lot less mistakes. So, alright, battery's still plugged in, power's still active. Okay, now a thing to note, there's positive and negative listed on this. It might take 1 or 2 tries figuring out which one it is. You got a 50-50 chance of making this land properly right off the bat, but I'm going to go with this orientation here, with black being on the negative, red being on the positive, as DC power generally is configured. And I am going to turn my power switch on, and what do you know? Let there be light. We are in this flashing mode, this sort of marquee mode, I guess, if you will. And if you keep hitting this button on the back, it changes your flash pattern until eventually you come to all of them being on. And there you go. Now we've got 6 hella lights on the front of this thing. Couldn't be more pleased with the results here that I've managed to get in just a matter of about 40 minutes of time. I think I started this exactly at 2 o'clock. It is now 2:40, 2:38, 2:39. There we go. And project completed. Feeling pretty good about that. And you can see how much that adds to the take-up now. So what I'm going to do is, while I have the camera running, pop this open.
And I'm gonna go ahead and grab a couple more turns on these shocks to move that spring collar down. And I'm gonna do that on both sides in the back. Maybe get a little bit more tension sitting on those rear shocks. Take a quick look and see how much I have left to work with, and I'm just about to the bottom on those. I wouldn't really want to be able to go too much further. This is such a heavy body on this truck, and I've added magnets all the way around. Oh, that's a little better. There we go. Okay, looking okay, looking all right. I think we're just about trail ready here, folks. So, hopefully you enjoyed the video. You know, sometimes I'm not the best at doing how-to stuff, but if there were some pointers in there that helped you get from point A to point B a little bit quicker, cool. That was the whole idea of me filming this. So that's it, and that's that. That's the 6 LED roof rack for the Gen 8 Scout 2. To show you how easily that goes on and how it looks after it's on.